Adesanya never lost his speed, he lost his timing. People always say Adesanya's decline started when he started losing his speed, but that's just not the case. If you rewatch Adesanya's fights, you can already see the comparison. After the first fight with Whitaker, you can already see with Costa, Vittori, Cannonier, Pereira, he looks just as fast, but he was still on top. Because what made Adesanya's style wasn't just he was very fast, it was his reflexes and how his opponents allowed him to manipulate the timing. If we look at Adesanya at his best, opponents would often let him do his thing, and they would overly respect him. He would feint at distance, shut down their offense, they start to hesitate, they get reckless, and they rush in and get easily countered. Once somebody is already biting on all of his feints, a fighter can start to look way slower than they actually are, making Adesanya seem a lot faster than he really was. But when somebody fights him, breaks his rhythm, it's the same thing when we see Adesanya against Vittori Costa at his peak. He looked untouchable, he was hard to hit. When somebody decides to start exchanges against him, he looks slower, he hesitates, and he starts getting hit. And his fights all of a sudden get a lot more competitive. What really made Adesanya's decline start was that things he could once do, he wasn't allowed to do anymore, or things he could get away with, he would now get punished. And this is where Adesanya's style backfired on him. He would heavily rely on his reflexes, so the moment his timing got a little bit off, and his opponents would not let him control fights like he once did, being overly respective towards his feints, now he would have to engage much faster. In the Dricus fight, Adesanya seemed to always be a step behind. He was trying to build momentum, while at the same time trying to defend Dricus' attacks. We see in a lot of exchanges Adesanya tries to start a combination, and then all of a sudden has to pause, he has to wait, he forgets to feint, has to react to a blitz or a takedown attempt, and then has to start the sequence all over again. When Adesanya isn't able to slow the pace down, he starts to struggle. And that's when he just tries to evade, he constantly tries to circle. We saw this a lot against Dricus. When Dricus would blitz, he would just try and evade. With Strickland, Adesanya gets no space, so he has no way to impose his feints, threaten his kicks. He is always on defense against the cage. And once the space gets taken away from Adesanya, his striking becomes a lot more predictable, and a lot of the habits he has, relying on his reflexes, all of a sudden starts backfiring on him. Similar with MMA, Adesanya tries to feint, and every feint he gets jabbed. He eats a leg kick, he gets blitzed with an uppercut, a takedown attempt. He isn't allowed to impose his feints the same way he once did. What made Adesanya's style so effective was fear. Fear of the better striker catching them. But the moment people realize Adesanya needs momentum, or as he isn't effective, now all of a sudden he started going on a losing streak. The issue wasn't Adesanya's speed, it was that he could no longer impose the system that he once dominated the middleweight division with. We see this with Pyfer too. Pyfer was a bit too respective of his feints in round 1, and he looked better. He was catching him, because once Adesanya gets to build momentum, he's dangerous. But he needs to build. If he doesn't build, he can't fight his fight. Where things really started going wrong for Adesanya was that he could no longer use his frames the same way. Adesanya would often be heavy on his front foot, leaning forward with his head, baiting his opponents in, at the same time pressuring them and psychologically posturing like a snake, being in and out of range very quickly. But what made this work so well was his reflexes. It was his frames, using his lead hand, always having it out there to detect the range, to use it to counter. Once his reflexes started slowing down a little bit, his timing was off and he could no longer use his frames the same way, where it was a crucial part of his game. It helped him slow the pace down, set up counters, control exchanges better. At the same time, he would always use it to defend takedowns easier, because he was already leaning forward and was ready to defend immediately, digging for underhooks and using his signature jab, or against Costa, pressuring while at the same time being able to counter, ending the fight. We would see this especially against pressure fighters. Costa always ran into Adesanya's frames, forcing him to slow down and get his legs picked apart. Once Adesanya can't use his frames, one of his biggest weapons gets taken away, and he really has no way to slow the pace down except just try and evade and use his feints and hope his opponents hesitate. We saw against Dricus, he was able to get caught, even where he would use his frames, try to judge the distance, making him get caught clean. But Adesanya's style relies on being able to judge the distance just right, just like he did against Pereira. Against the cage, in the finishing sequence, he leans back and avoids the left hook barely, and allows him to set up the counter. We see against Imavov for a moment, he is able to put up a frame, evades the attack, and counters clean. But against Pfeiffer, we see this is where his timing really started being off. He was getting clean a lot. He was missing with his frames. He was trying to lean back and do pull counters, similar like he did against Whitaker. But the timing wasn't there, and he ate power shots clean, coming from a mile away. The second issue with Adesanya's style was the stand switching. By default, Adesanya would always stand switch, naturally giving his opponent openings, the same way Imavov blitzed him right after he switched stance, and how he immediately tried to do the same thing, rely on his frames, but then got manipulated, got his hand taken down, and blitzed before he realized it. And opponents would often time him, being allowed to close the distance once he would stand switch. The third thing is space. Adesanya would often allow himself to get backed against the cage. He would use this to set up his takedown defense. But at the same time, Adesanya isn't a fighter that tries to counter heavily when you try and pressure him. He just evades, circles, tries to reset, tries to pause the exchange. But once he just gets attacked, he just keeps defending until all of a sudden he can't defend anymore and he gets caught. Against Pereira, this might have worked, baiting him in, making him overextend. But against Strickland, Imavov, Pfeiffer, when Adesanya doesn't have the same reflexes anymore, that same willingness to get backed up against the fence, is one of the reasons he loses. Adesanya is no longer in his prime, but he never made the needed adjustments to beat the new age of middleweights. He was still able to outstrike most of them. He was winning until he wasn't. Once he focused on throwing more output, fighting for more space, starting exchanges himself, it was working. But once he allows himself to get backed up, tries and rely on his reflexes like he once did, he gets caught, he gets outboxed in the pocket, he gets overwhelmed, and he loses. Not because he's out of his prime, but because he's fighting in the wrong environment.